Brought to you by Lean Body, the #1 protein shake in gyms across America.
Hey guys, Lee Labrada here. I am at the Labrada Nutrition Gym in Houston, Texas. It is my pleasure to welcome my good friend Ben Yannis, who is a biomechanics expert. You've probably seen some of his material online. It's very good. Ben is a coach's coach. He's got hundreds of coaches that he actually trains.
My name is Ben Yannis. Honored to be here with Lee Labrada. Today we're going to be going over a back and biceps workout. We're really going to look at the mechanics, specifically the biomechanics, the forces, the physics of exercise. My job as a coach of coaches is basically to show people how to target the muscles they want, not based on speculation and guesswork, but based on anatomy and physics, the things that we really understand well.
We're going to go through several exercises showing some of the modern techniques and also talking about some of the old school techniques that I used to my advantage back in the day when I was competing as an IFBB Pro and the Mr. Olympia.
I'm really looking forward to this workout. Lee, let's jump right into it. All right, so our first exercise here is a chest supported row. This is a really unique and awesome piece made by Prime, and it's gonna be an awesome variation specifically for two reasons. One is these adjustable handles here that can move in any direction. So you can pull wide, you can pull narrow, you can lean forward and do either one of those things. The second thing is gonna be this chest support, right? So we don't have to kind of manage what our spine is doing throughout the entire range of motion. We can basically just squeeze into the chest support and row however we like and however is comfortable. And this particular path is going to be a great path to target the lats and most specifically the upper portions of the lats. In addition, it's going to target the traps, so all those muscles between the shoulder blades, and if you want, a little bit of the biceps and the forearms as well. This piece is also, I think, an awesome option, just because if you look at this side over here, it has 3 different loading options. So you can load on the top peg, you can load on the middle peg, you can load on the lower peg. And basically what this does is just makes it heavy in different portions of the range of motion. So the peg that we have this on right here makes it really, really hard in that stretched position, which, you know, as we know now, seems to be super important for muscle growth. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this piece in particular, what you like about it, what you don't.
One of the things that I like, Ben, is what you just mentioned, the adjustability of the force curve, you know, so that you can emphasize the top of the movement, bottom of the movement, or just, you know, just general tension throughout. You know, one of the couple of things that I keep in mind as I do these types of exercises, you know, is to essentially keep my chest high, keep my back arched, and then just essentially just to pull in. You can try to keep the elbows as close to the body as possible to target my lats. You may have a row machine like this in your gym or a variation of that. These are really, really good, you know, and especially if you're a little bit more mature like I am, you know, and you have any kind of lower back problem in terms of picking weights up off the floor and the like, these are really nice for stabilizing your back.
Yeah, and I think a key point there to remember as well, you touched on it, is just the idea of always making sure that you're glued into this chest pad. You can kind of think about it almost like this is the anchor off of which you're able to create the row. So you see a lot of guys, you know, they'll start really, really nicely on here and they end up kind of pulling way back off of the chest support, right? Almost like they're doing some kind of like hyperextension and action. Right. So sometimes it depends on how heavy the weight is, but what I actually like to do is sometimes when people are pulling themselves off of the pad, I actually like to put the feet almost, it looks a little weird, but you know, behind the body, because a lot of times when the feet are in front, guys can kind of leverage their feet off them.
A little bit more.
So if you actually put the feet behind and almost push yourself into the pad, sure, it's almost like a self-secured way to make sure that you're driving those elbows back and really using nothing else but the lats and those muscles in the, you know, mid-back.
That's a good point. What do you think about people using straps? You know, I see a lot of people using straps in the gym, you know, and I can certainly understand for something like a deadlift or that type of thing. But what about something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably depends on, you know, how strong the person is. You know, you got someone like your son, right, walking around the gym. You've got this half of these pegs fully loaded. It's going to be hard to maintain the grip. I think at a certain point, probably though, most people can get away with not using straps. I think some people perhaps do take it a little bit to too much of an extreme. But I just think that, you know, if the goal is, hey, I want to make sure that my lats are cooked at the end of the set, if our grip is limiting us, why not maybe train the forearms separately and just maybe use the straps for the duration of the back training?
As far as the cadence goes, you know, I like personally to keep the tension on the muscle and do the reps slower. But I've seen people really cheat, you call using that much body English, you know, and I have to wonder, it turns it into a ballistic movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the point of the straps, it's a lot harder to hold on to stuff when it's, you know, basically falling, right? So I do think that if forearms are maybe an issue for any of you, in terms of just them feeling like they're always the rate limiter, a lot of times tempo can resolve that issue. If you're not comfortable using straps, or if straps for whatever reason just don't feel, you know, good on your wrist with whatever amount of weight you're using. I do think that over time, the stronger that people get, the more that their back tends to outpace their grip a little bit. But I would say that a vast majority of just, you know, your average person looking to get fit, I think it's a great thing to get the grip stronger, make sure the hands are actually, you know, maintain their strength at least as people get into older ages.
Man, what are your thoughts on, you know, rounding the shoulders forward and pulling versus bringing the shoulders back, arching and pulling?
You know, the interesting thing about a piece like this is that it's so adjustable in terms of what angle you can pull at, right? So if I say, set up on this machine and I keep my back super proud, kind of like you had it initially, I'm pulling at like a fairly, you know, horizontal angle. But if I, let's say, arch even a little bit more, it's almost like I'm pulling at an upward angle now, like a little bit of a shrug.
Sure.
And so the more forward that I maybe tilt my body, the more it almost becomes like I'm kind of pulling almost like a pull down. You know, if you imagine I was like all the way tipped forward, I would be doing something like this. Sure. But I think maybe what you're describing is something that is more like this kind of rounding and moving away from the pad.
Yeah.
I actually think that could have an application if someone wanted to do something that was, you know, that included all of their back simultaneously, like all of your erectors, right, all those muscles that contribute to the deadlift and so on. But I think generally speaking, when you see people doing the rounding arching thing, it's because they're not in control of the motion. I would agree. So just as I think you mentioned this to me earlier, but always kind of leading and lowering with the elbow, I think is a really good idea on this piece to maintain control.
And so guys, if you don't have a piece of equipment like this, you know, a chest supported seated row in your gym, an alternative that you can try is something that I used to do back when I was training for the Mr. Olympia in the 80s and 90s, which is this incline bench dumbbell row. So you get yourself a couple of dumbbells, get an incline bench like this, and you'll just lay across it. And essentially just row the weights up to your waist level. Get a good contraction at the top. I'm really feeling that in the middle of my back.
I think something to point out here too that was much more clear to see on the machine is just that Lee keeps his hand right underneath his elbow, right? So he's not pulling his hand to his shoulder. He doesn't want to do like a biceps curl type thing as he's rowing. He's pulling with the elbow just like we did on the machine. You could just think of it like force is force no matter where you are, whether it's a dumbbell or whether it's coming from the machine. You got the chest support, you got the load on your hand, and that's pretty much all you need just to perform a horizontal row. All right, so this is a mega mass pull down machine with some modified moving handles. This is a fantastic option to basically train not the upper portions of the lats, kind of like we just did on those two rows, but the lower portions of the lats, the one are the kind of more on the side. So, I mean, it's basically just a regular pull down. You secure yourself into the pads, and just like we were doing with the rows, we're pulling with our elbows straight down to our hip pockets. And I mean, once you kind of had this set up at the right angle for you, it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Much like we talked about with that dumbbell row, we don't want to kind of be pulling with the hands toward the face. You almost want to treat your hands like they're hooks, right? So as you're pulling down, you're driving, almost like with a little bit of a thumbless grip, I find to be really, really helpful for these. And as you're pulling again, you're thinking about not just pulling down on the way down, but also pulling down on the way up, right? Because as the weight comes up, a lot of people, I feel like on pull downs, tend to just let things go.
Let it up. And that's probably arguably the best part of the movement. Yeah, because that's the eccentric part of the movement where the muscle is lengthening under tension.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think that maybe an easy way to think about it is just that this handle, it's always going to pull you up. And so whether you're moving this way or whether you're moving this way, you always got to be thinking down, down, down toward the floor. So I love that elbow cue. Are there any other cues maybe that you like about a machine pull down like this?
Yeah, one of the cues that I use is to think about the weight being attached to my elbow instead of being attached here. Just another way of even more forgetting the hand, right? And your mind off the hand and just thinking about what is the motion, what's the trajectory of the upper arm bone, relative to the lats, right?
Yeah.
So the lats are contracting to bring that humerus down and back, so I just tend to think of the weight being attached here to the elbow, and my hands just facilitate that.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the cool things too, you mentioned earlier about this machine is that it moves in an arc. So if you kind of notice the direction that those handles up there are pivoting, they're kind of like forward in front of me. And then as I come down, it's moving downward into my body. So this will allow you to really load more of the total range of motion, I think, of that upper arm movement.
It's pretty unique that way. For me, it almost feels like a combo pull down and pull.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a fantastic feel. So I know you like to go down with the
underhand grip,
the chin grip.
Yeah.
I would say that the technique and the technique tips pretty much identical to that pull down that we were just looking at. I think if you are someone who likes to go maybe just a little bit wider, maybe for whatever reason that's more comfortable for you, I think it's probably a good idea just to kind of maybe move the elbows a little bit in front of you and kind of pull straight down to those hips. And I think both of these options are great. I don't know if that's been your experience.
I like the idea of using a variety of grips. This grip right here, the underhanded grip, for me, seems to put the upper arm in a position where it's just easier to pull straight and right along the side of my torso and neck, right?
It's almost like you're scraping your ribs,
right?
Kinda.
So almost like scraping the ribs, and so that really puts a lot of tension on the lats. Now going wider, and it's really funny because in the old days, and I'm talking back in the 70s, the bodybuilders thought that the wider the grip, the better. For a wide back, you had to have a wide grip. Well, if that was the case, then the widest back, I guess, would come from you bring that way out here. But unfortunately, now your range of motion is pretty short, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that that was right, but the wider grips, for me anyway, I feel that a little bit more, makes it a little bit easier to contract in the middle of the back.
100%.
And the teres and some of those muscles there in the back. But largely I liked performing the underhanded grip. So that's what I'm going to do here.
One of the cues and concepts that we haven't talked about yet that I think is kind of similar but maybe helpful in a different way with these lat motions is if the elbow pulling cue that we've been talking about doesn't really seem to work well for you, I actually like to have people think about pulling with their armpits. So it's almost like I have a string that's attached here, and that armpit is moving all the way to the floor, and then that armpit is kind of raising up as you control.
Right.
So actually just driving the movement, again, not with pretty much anything but the hand, kind of seems to be the theme here.
Right.
Seems to be a good idea in my experience. When people do pull downs, right, I think everyone, to your point, kind of naturally feels a little bit better with their arms in front of their body. Mm-hmm. And that's because like the wider that you start to move, the less that you can actually really hold. It's like holding a back double bicep and then trying to kind of continue to squeeze down. I feel like people's hands naturally want to drift this way. So you see a lot of guys when they grip super wide, they end up actually with the hands almost kind of doing that. So when you try to force your arms behind your head, you're squeezing your traps, and all of your traps actually create the opposite motion that you're trying. So your traps, raise your shoulder blades, they shrug your shoulder blades. But if you're trying to squeeze them as you're doing a pull down, it feels like a lot of like crampiness.
Yes, it does.
But it's not sort of the same as like, tension. It's like when you experience a Charlie horse in bed, you're like, oh my gosh, you don't think that that's good, right? So like, I feel like a lot of people get that crampiness and they're like, oh, this must be good. But it just comes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like, what muscle are we trying to target? What makes the most sense relative to that muscle? let's just load it. If we want to load the traps, we'll do more of a row. If we want to load the lats, we do more of a pull down.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Yep.
Yeah.
So as we were discussing here, one of the variations that that I used to see was the pull down to behind the neck. So literally pulling the bar, behind the neck. But I never liked the feel of that because I felt like what it was doing was taking my scapula were taking an anterior tilt like this forward. And I was never really able to squeeze these properly. Just as Ben mentioned, it just produced a lot of crampiness, just felt like an inefficient form of the exercise.
And the one thing that I would add is that if you look at, not that the weight on the cable stack is everything, but typically when you see people doing that, they're using like a fraction of the load that they're using with, which again is not always, sometimes that could be a good thing if you're controlling it more. But it's like if you're trying your hardest and you're lifting, the second stack down versus the 8th stack, it's probably a little bit of a red flag there.
Yeah. I thought that I would show you guys this nifty machine here that we got from Megamass, and the best way I can describe it is that it is a supported Smith machine that is made specifically for the back. So you see these linear bearings and the rods here, the guides. But basically just grab the handles here and just pull the way up to your chest. If you were to take a look at this from the side, it looks like I'm rowing, almost like a bent over row type of a thing, but it's supporting me, and it's got a very unique feel. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic option. And one of the cool parts about this is that this foot plate, this foot platform here is super, super stable. So your feet aren't gonna go, pretty much anywhere. And unlike say something like a barbell row or even just a standing dumbbell row where you kind of have to support yourself, you can really focus, I feel like, on just the pulling muscles, specifically because of the fact that the force is, basically going directly through your feet. You don't have to balance forward or backward. You can stay more upright, more leaned over to whatever your goals are or your comfort are. So I feel like this is sort of like almost an upgraded version of a Smith machine row. Yeah. And I feel like a Smith machine row is also another fantastic option.
Sure. If you don't have a machine like this, you could always use a standard Smith machine, which you'll find in most gyms. And Ben, one more thing. It seems like these days when you go online, you hear a lot of people say, well, Lee didn't do that back in the day, or Ronnie didn't do that back in the day, or Dorian didn't do that back in the day. Well, guess what? Back in the day, we didn't have these types of machines. And I dare say if we had the machines, we'd be using them. I know that I would.
This is a new age triceps extension motion, which is basically just a cable extension motion that I think you can individualize a little bit more to either arm. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna grab one cable with so if I'm grabbing the left cable, I'm gonna grab it with my right hand, and I'm grabbing the right cable with my left hand, I'm just gonna cross it. So you're almost like doing a row and you're holding a row position. And then from there, you're gonna just keep your shoulders still. And guess what? It's a normal triceps extension. But the cool thing about this is that because these pulleys on the top actually pivot, if you're, say, like a wider guy, you can put your arms out a little bit wider. If you're more narrow, you can step a little bit more narrow. You can move closer in, farther away. Just a ton of different options here. And I think that just because of the versatility, this is especially one that I love a lot, especially guys who get elbow issues, which I know is a problem for many bodybuilders, especially guys who are in their older years. And then lastly, I would just say, use of the cuffs can be helpful, so you don't have to really, force yourself to grip anything. It's not like the load of a tricep extension is going to be too hard to hold, but I do find that just kind of taking the hand out of it, kind of like you might with straps on some kind of pulling motion can be a good idea, but you can also just use regular handles. And if you don't have access to this kind of cable column tower, you can literally just grab one of them, pull it down with both hands, and do it single arm. Just go back and forth between arms.
This exercise is a tricep push down. And this is a machine that can be found at just about any gym. Typically, you'll either use a straight bar or ropes. In this case, I've got these ropes with the special handles on them. And what I'll do is I'll just start with my elbows by my side, and I'll just extend down and towards my legs. just making sure that I do the nice and slow and just feel a nice full contraction throughout the exercise.
Do you kind of like that elbows tucked method? Don't like the elbows flare too much?
I do. I know what you're referring to, because I see guys that splay their elbows and push this way. Yeah, that kind of thing. But I like keeping my elbows by my sides. Yeah, I've always had a very good feel that way.
I love it. I think that much like the other cable option, you could always, if whatever attachment you have here, whether it's this or a straight bar or a regular rope doesn't feel great, you could just attach a single handle on there, or even 2 handles. Maybe just keep yourself a little bit tighter. Don't have to manage as much. If you come over to the other side of this stack, a lot of gyms, will have cables just like this one. And a fun option that I like that's pretty much the same thing, but just a little different, is just a lean against the stack. So it's basically the same thing, but you got that cable nice and snug, to the nose. And I don't know,
so it's a strong incentive to keep it off your nose.
Exactly, right? But it's like, brushing along the hairs there. But everything you said, I think, is perfect for this one as well. Elbows kind of tight or maybe slightly in front. And I don't know, I just think it's nice to be able to kind of relax into this guy and not have to worry about, because sometimes you see guys who are moving a lot of load on that cable stack, and it can be kind of hard sometimes to start to use the body English.
Yeah, they do. They'll start using the body, they'll come up like
this. Yeah. So this is a great way to just prevent that, just glue yourself.
I like to keep the exercise strict, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
And again, for a more mature athlete, I think that's important to avoid injuries and also to get more out of the exercise, because you got to keep that tension on the muscle. And if the exercise gets too ballistic, where you're moving it too fast, there's going to be times where the stress is accentuated. Other times when it's not quite as stressed, but it definitely can throw the stress onto the joint or the connective tissue, which might result in an injury.
Lee, triceps looking nice, man.
Oh, thank you.
Zoom in on that. Yeah.
It's almost like you had big arms or something. So how do you feel this compares to the traditional push down, if you'll call it that?
Oh, I love this.
You like that one?
Yeah, I love this. I love this machine. I love how smooth it is, and I really like the fact that when you're using the separated handles, each tricep has to carry its own weight, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can really get a nice contraction.
Yeah,
I really like it.
I do find that some guys over very long periods of training, I know a few come to mind in particular, they will literally have quite the different size triceps, specifically of the long head. For whatever reason, it has tended to be that one, where one of them will be actually like 20% smaller, than the other, and I'll have them do this, and it'll be like the one hand's like here, and
Does it even it out over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the strength actually comes fairly quickly. So I feel like if any of you are new to this movement, it'll feel a little bit awkward at first, because with something like the rope, you can kind of hunker down, with your lats and your pecs. And when you get to these guys, it's kind of like you're kind of figuring. It's almost like you're doing like an isometric, reverse fly or something like that. So it's a little weird to get used to, but I think once you do, it's a really great option. All right, so this is our machine preacher curl, and much like that first row machine that we looked at, it's got all these different loading pegs. So I think for starters, it makes sense to load these top two. And much like that row machine we looked at, there's an adjustable handle, and they're actually what's called isolaterals, fancy term, right? And so basically you can use them individually. So I could do this curl one arm. If I'm gonna do it 2 arms, that handle is basically just going to adjust to wherever my hands move, which is great. And you got these little sliding things on the wrist, so you can adjust for wrist comfort and wrist position. So just much like many sort of newer machines, there's just a lot of ability to adjust the motion. And I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits of the newer machines, is that you have so many different ways to move your body, adjust the grip, whether it's wider or more narrow, 2 hands or 1 hand, these things that pivot. I think that's a huge upside. And I also think that just because you've got this preacher pad, you're nice and locked in. I think a lot of guys, specifically with the free weight curls, tend to do the swinging thing that kind of we've been talking about. And so this preacher pad here is a great option to limit that.
What I find is that a machine like this locks you in to a plane of motion, right? And so you lose a few of the degrees of freedom, of motion, as Ben said, but that's a good thing for most people. I think it also increases the safety of the exercise for the casual user, especially, because let's say that you get halfway through this thing, you feel, a strain or something, you can strop it, and just get out of it. I think it makes the exercise more expedient. It's easy to get in, load up, get done, locks you into a range of motion, so less degrees of motion, basically guards against injury.
Yeah, and one more thing I would say just to add to that too is a lot of guys I think are worried about the perfect seat position. I would just say whatever seat position allows you to kind of comfortably hold your arms here without feeling like you're gonna come off of it. So if you have the seat too high, you're not gonna really be secured down. If you have the seat too low, your shoulders are gonna be shrugging up. So just anywhere as a middle ground I think is a really good idea, just to pin your chest in, isolate that motion.
Yep. So just low enough to where the back of the arms are making contact with the bench.
Yeah. And you want this whole thing glued, and we'll go over another option that you like in a second here, but just to make sure that that sort of doesn't happen, right? And we just basically stay glued the entire time.
All right, you mentioned another option. Let's go take a look.
Let's do it.
So we talked about an alternative to the Bicep Preacher machine, and this is a freeway preacher bench, as you can see. And so it's essentially the same movement. You're going to grasp the bar. You're going to make sure that you got good contact with the bench, so that you're not really leaning over the bench or you're not too far over the bench. Just essentially just make sure that the back of your arms are making contact with the bench. It's real important that you keep this one nice and slow and under control. The last thing you want to do is to come down too fast, because unlike that machine that we just used, there's nothing to stop you here other than the limitations of your joints. And you don't want to hyperextend that bicep, run the risk of an injury. So you probably want to stop shy of full extension there, and just keep the exercise nice and slow. Keep the tension on the biceps.
I think it's fantastic. Do you like to do this with dumbbells as well?
I do, but
Preference?
I have a preference for the bar.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason is pretty simple. It's simply because I think that the bar is safer. I have seen many people actually tear a bicep because of you may be using too much weight or bouncing it at the bottom accidentally, Yeah. So I personally like using the bar better.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
I love doing it single arm with the dumbbell. I think this is a fairly naturally sort of steep angle. I think a lot of times when guys get hurt going to that full position, they either go floppy or they're at an angle that's really flat.
As in this case, where you get actually hyperextended.
Yeah.
That acts as a safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the bench would actually act as your safety hub.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of guys, when they do get hurt, they get hurt when the load is significant right here.
Right.
It's not, you pretty much never see, literally never seen anyone tear their bicep just doing the standing curl.
Yeah, the standing.
So it's almost like they've got this fulcrum, this crank to like.
Yes.
So if you're worried about it as a user, just move the angle up a little bit more, because when you move the angle up, your arm will just basically be a little bit more vertical. And even though you can't really get behind the bench if the bench is too high, you just put your foot in front of it and do it that way. So the arm position could be slightly different, but I just think that much like many of the other free weight options, there's just so much ability to move up, down, left, right for your comfort. And so I think that specifically with a bench, because, you see a lot of those in some gyms, but, a lot of commercial gyms, they'll just have the regular benches.
Right.
And I think this is as good of an option, at least for most people.
All right, so you guys may not have all of the machines that you saw today in your gym, but you're going to have machines that you can do similar exercises on. So the key thing is to adapt to whatever machines and exercise equipment and dumbbells that you have. And remember that the muscles don't see those machines. They just feel stress. And the important thing is to just stress the muscle enough to get a reaction out of it, that reaction being growth, adaptation, and that's exactly what you want. That's how you're going to make progress. So, I am just tickled to death that I was able to work with Ben today to show you some of these back and bicep exercises. We hope that you'll try these in your gym. Ben, what do you think?
I think that was spot on, and I think that maybe just one other key point or series of key points to remember: if it's targeting the muscle, if it's stable, if it's comfortable, thumbs up.